Let's start by doing a little time traveling. Let's travel back to when we were 7 years old. Remember 7? It was that time of your life when you were absolutely positive that if just given the chance that you could be anything or do anything or even have any adventure you could dream up. Now, the ironic thing is that childlike wonder and that faith that we have in ourselves and even the world has all but faded away by the time we can start putting action behind our dreams. And then, for many of us, well, our own children come along and suddenly life becomes more about managing expectations than making dreams come true. And that cycle continues. What if I told you that you could re-engage that kid mind and break that cycle and prove to your own children that life truly is all about limitless possibilities and that just about anything they can dream up can come true if they just take action and ask? Well, about 8 years ago, my daughter Noelle was 7 years old. She came flying down the stairs one night. She comes running over to me. And she says, "Daddy, I know what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be a cartoonist." Well, let me set the scene here for a second. It was late, and she should have been asleep about an hour before. And if I'm totally honest, I had had a pretty long day. So in that moment, I could have done what most of us would do when it's 9 o'clock and your 7-year-old won't go to sleep. I could have said, "That's awesome. Now go to bed." And I probably would have. But she said that with such passion and such conviction that it unlocked a lesson in me that had been dormant for decades. See, when I was 12 years old, my dad, who was also my Little League coach, did something absolutely unheard of. Now, that year, our league had upgraded our uniforms to ones that were exact replicas of the major league teams we were named after. Now, for some reason, the only thing they didn't buy were the matching hats. Now, my dad was that guy who always said, if you're going to do something, do it right. So this bothered him a little bit. And then he had a thought. Well, if the league couldn't provide the major league hats for his Mets, well, then maybe the real major league Mets could. So instead of just dismissing this thought as an off-the-wall idea, he put action behind it. And he wrote a letter to New York Mets manager Joe Torre asking if there's anything he could do to help. Well, shortly before our season was about to begin, my sisters and I came home from school one day to find these 2 big boxes on our porch from some strange address in Florida. Now, keep in mind that this was way pre-Amazon, when getting anything delivered to your house but a standard-sized envelope just didn't happen. So I'm sure you can appreciate the clock watching that's going on now as we're waiting for my dad to pull in the driveway. Well, we finally opened the boxes, and inside, and you guessed it, were 30 of these. Now, in response to my dad's letter, Joe Torre went through his entire team's spring training locker room, gathered up all the extra hats, and sent them with a letter wishing us good luck. Well, it turns out what was also in those boxes was a lesson that I would keep with me for the rest of my life. And that is, if you want something, regardless of how impossible it might seem, all you have to do is take action and ask. So now there I am in my own living room with my own daughter, who has just told me in no uncertain terms that she's going to be a cartoonist when she grows up. And there that lesson was, ready to be taught one more time. So we sat down on our couch, and we started talking about this cartooning thing. And she was so lit up, it was contagious. I mean, I think within about 3 minutes, I was ready to drop everything and become a cartoonist too. And I realized that during that conversation, that we had become so like-minded, that we were no longer talking father to daughter. We were talking kid to kid. And that changed everything. So I finally sent her to bed, and I knew what I had to do. I needed to find a cartoonist for this girl to talk to. So later that night, I discovered that year's Cartoonist of the Year, Hillary Price, lived just a couple of hours away. So now instead of waiting for my dad to pull in the driveway to open up some boxes, I couldn't wait for my daughter to get up in the morning to share the news. So the next morning over breakfast, we talked about it. We jotted down some ideas. And she grabbed a pencil and paper, and off she went. And she turned those ideas into a letter that started with, "Dear Hillary Price, my name is Noelle Goyette. I am 7 years old, and I want to be a cartoonist just like you." Well, a couple weeks later, and Hillary responded with an invitation to her studio, where she answered every question Noelle had and even provided a drawing lesson. Now, I'll tell you, we left that studio walking on air because, I'll never forget that car ride home. We had just experienced something together for the very first time, and it felt like we were connected much more deeply than ever before. And I asked her, I said, "Noelle, how do you feel about all this?" And she said, "Daddy, it feels like magic." Well, I'll tell you, right at that moment, the father-daughter project that we now call Yours for the Asking was born. So here was ideal. Whenever Noelle found something that interested her or ignited her passion or just made that light bulb go off, she'd tell me. And then together, we'd try to find somebody who was doing something spectacular in that area, and she'd write them a letter and ask to meet them. If they said yes, I always did my best to make it happen. Well, around that time, she was just getting into music, and we were having a blast finding new things to listen to and explore, from jazz to classical to blues. So she made music the project. And part of our daily life became trying to find people in the music industry to write to and learn from. So she wrote more letters, and she received more replies. And very quickly, she found herself behind the controls of WGBH Radio in Boston, where she experienced broadcasting firsthand with host Kathy Fuller. From there, she went backstage at the Boston Symphony and learned about classical music from none other than conductor Keith Lockhart. And then, and to my amazement, we found ourselves in the dressing room of jazz legend Dave Brubeck. And I watched her stand in awe as he explained to her what it took to be on stage and perform a lifetime of jazz. Well, at that age, all kids' passions are fleeting, and Noelle was certainly no exception. And she'd always been a very talented artist, but now her focus had turned to fashion design. And soon, everything in my house started turning into a dress. My bed sheets became dresses, and my pillowcases became dresses, and yes, my curtains came off the wall and became dresses too. So once again, she followed that passion, and she wrote another letter, this time to fashion designer Michelle Smith, the founder of Millie of New York. And that letter ended with, "I have a lot of questions about being a fashion designer, and I'd like to come to your studio and ask you them. May I please come to your studio and ask you my questions? Love, Noelle." Well, a short time later, and Michelle too responded with an invitation, but not to the Millie Studios, but to backstage at New York Fashion Week, the largest and most prestigious fashion event in the world. And I'll tell you, the most surreal moment of my life was watching my 8-year-old daughter interview a world-famous fashion designer backstage at the most prestigious fashion event in the world as an industry reporter and their camera crew waited, and I'm going to say somewhat impatiently, for her to finish so they could do their job. And I did say 8 years old. Everything I just shared with you happened in less than a year. Now, these were certainly wonderful adventures and definitely life-changing for Noelle, but they turned out to mean so much more to me than that. They brought me back and showed me a world of possibility that I'd all but forgotten. Through the simple process of her writing these letters, I learned how to be more present and more engaged and even more patient with Noelle than I'd ever been. Experiencing that incredible confidence that she was going to get a response each and every time she popped a letter in the mail, re-engaged my own kid mind to the point where now I'm pretty sure it's stuck in the on position. And finally, watching her as she interviewed these larger-than-life figures in such an adult way and under such adult circumstances forced me to realize that she was growing up faster than I cared to admit, and that I would have to prioritize my time better to make every moment count. Now, if you have children of your own, you might be thinking, well, it's hard enough to keep them fed and reasonably clean, and on some days even just alive, right? Never mind being on the constant lookout for ways to help them put action behind their dreams. And you're absolutely right. But the good news is that there are two things that all kids say that hopefully after today will set off alarm bells of opportunity in your head. They are, I hope and I wish. Now, listen very carefully to what comes after those words, because most times you can take those small things and turn them into adventures and lessons that the two of you will never forget. Well, our kids are growing up in a world much more complex than we could have ever imagined. And as a result, they need to connect with us more deeply than ever before. Now, I'm not talking about the part of you left over from a long day of adulting, but the real you, the you that once too dreamed without boundaries. So go and make that happen. Help them put action behind a small dream, or even find their own Joe Torre, or their own Hillary Price, or their own Michelle Smith. And while you're at it, why don't you put some action behind some of your own dreams as well? And then together live in that world of limitless possibility. And soon, you will find out that it truly is all yours for the asking. Thank you.